Hi, this is Scott Bradfield. This is Reading Great Books in the Bathtub, and welcome to the bathtub. This week we're going to be talking about a writer who you probably haven't heard of unless you were, like myself, a teenager reading science fiction magazines in the 70s and 80s, or 60s in the 70s. And his name is R.A. Lafferty. R.A. Lafferty. I think it's Raphael Aloysius, I think. It's this very Irish name. And he was a character who wrote a lot of short stories and novels. He was a very bountiful storyteller. He was always in all the magazines. He wrote lots of stories. He was extremely strange writer. He was not a science fiction writer or fantasy writer at all. And he was basically kind of a very much American tall tale telling, self-taught absorber and dispenser of wild information, much of it made up, sort of autodidactic sort of character. I want to give you a picture, show his picture here. So there's old R.A. Lafferty, who died, I think, about 15 years ago. He looks like everybody's grandpa, who, if you were my age in the 60s and 70s. And he wrote lots and lots of stories, which are now being brought out in these amazingly beautiful editions by Centipede Press. Don't let the name of them bother you. Centipede Press does some of the most beautiful books I've ever seen. They tend to focus on horror and science fiction, and Lafferty is, again, if you like or don't like science fiction, it should have nothing to do with it. Lafferty is a big, broad, wild, intelligent, unusual comic talent, and there's a totally unusual writer. And if you love strange and crazy fiction, you really should try him. This is a book you can't really take in the bathtub. I'm afraid to take it in the bathtub. I had a lot of trouble getting copies of these. The series is coming out. It's the collected short fiction of Lafferty. It's coming out once a year. It's a lovely series, beautifully bound, beautifully designed. Some great introductions. This one's got a great introduction by Michael Swanwick, a very important science fiction writer, and a very good introduction to Lafferty. Then they're trying to collect everything, because Lafferty wrote a lot of stuff. And he was such a strange character. He said at one point, someone told him, you should never start writing till you're 40. He started writing when he was 40 years old. He was, as the picture kind of shows, he did like a correspondence school in electronics. I don't think he ever married, and I want to say he lived with his sister. I can't remember. There's not a real biography of him out there, but you can pick it up on Wikipedia and some of these introductions. And he said he started writing in his 40s to cut down on his drinking, which is funny only because everyone who talks about knowing Lafferty and meeting Lafferty in the 60s and 70s is he was incredibly drunk. Every time anyone met him, he seemed to have been totally pissed. So this was reducing his drinking from the time before he started writing. The stuff he writes, he was a devout Catholic. And you can sort of see a little sense of distrust of the material world in his work, but they're very irreverent and sacrilegious in many ways about just the significance of life itself. But there is a belief in most of the stories of something beyond this life, though it's completely run by crazy people. I can't describe too much of the stories, except to say he used to write a lot of them. They're all constructed in very bizarre and peculiar ways. Each story is very different from the other story. He's a little bit like Bartholomew, but much tougher than Bartholomew. Where Bartholomew's kind of just fun and ridiculous, Lafferty's got this kind of muscular intelligence behind it and a control over the form, which is much more interesting than Bartholomew. Every story is very different. They're wild, and they teach you the rules of each story almost immediately. Let me start one I just reread. I've been rereading these over the past week or two. And again, I can't read this in the bathtub, but I've been rereading them at night. This is a story called The Hole on the Corner. Let me read just an opening to give you a sense of the flavor and the idiosyncrasy of his prose. It's called The Hole in the Corner. Homer Hoose came home that evening to the Golden Cliché. The unknowable dog, who was a personal friend of his, The perfect house where just to live was a happy riot. The loving and unpredictable wife and the 5 children. The perfect number. 4 more would have been too many. 4 less would have been too few. The dog howled in terror and bristled up like a hedgehog. Then it got a whiff of Homer and recognized him. It licked his heels and gnawed his knuckles and made him welcome. A good dog, though a fool. Who wants a smart dog? Homer had a little trouble with the doorknob. They don't have them in all the recensions, you know, and he had that off-the-track feeling tonight. But he figured it out. You don't pull it, you turn it, and open the door. Did you remember to bring what I asked you to bring this morning, Homer? The loving wife, Regina, inquired. What did you ask me to bring this morning, quick heat blueberry biscuit of my heart? Homer asked. If I'd remembered, I'd have phrased it different when I asked if you remembered, Regina explained. But I know I told you to bring something, old ketchup of my soul. Homer, look at me, Homer. You look different tonight. Different. You're not my Homer, are you? Help! Help! There's a monster in my house. Help! Help! Shriek! It's always nice to be married to a wife who doesn't understand you, Homer said. He enfolded her affectionately, bore her down, trod on her with large, friendly hooves, and began, as it seemed, to devour her. Scene break. Where'd you get the monster, Mama? Son Robert asked as he came in. What's he got your whole head in his mouth for? Can I have one of the apples in the kitchen? What's he going to do, kill you, Mama? Shriek, shriek, said Mama Regina. Just one apple, Robert. There's just enough to go around. Yes, I think he's going to kill me. Shriek! Son Robert got an apple and went indoors. So there's the first 2 scenes of a story in which we start to slowly see, again, you have to pay attention to almost every sentence in Lafferty, is that there's a hole in the corner in which various versions of all these people in this reality come and go. And there's all these infinite reality of people and different types of creaturely versions of them. And the stories all start off crazy. They often start off, they seem to have no logic to them. And then they eventually kind of develop their own interior logic to them. So you have to pay attention to each one. Everyone's different. The style requires you to listen to every sentence. And they often seem quite sloppy, and maybe sometimes they are, I don't know, because usually if you pay attention long enough, there is a incredibly tight intelligence controlling each of the stories. I was going to read another passage, but we're already almost getting running out of time. I don't want to spend too much. I want to do more Lafferty over the years. The other writer he reminds me of is Flann O'Brien, the great comic Irish novelist, who could also start a story with an idea and develop 5 more ideas within the next few pages that were all completely, you hadn't really seen anyone do these ideas before. And Lafferty is like that, even more complex in his invention. While I was reading this, to bring something into the bathtub, I picked up this is the first novel of Lafferty, and this will give you an idea of finding Lafferty's work is worth doing, but it's not always going to be easy. This was his first novel. It's called Space Shanty. It's part of one of these old ace doubles from the 60s, and this is published in 68. I want to say 1968. I would have been 13 when I read this damn thing. And I couldn't remember it, but I reread it again. I probably misunderstood most of it. This is a minor classic comic novel. It's very funny. It's based on the Odyssey. So it's about a group of, it's Commander Roadstrom and a bunch of other space captains coming back from an intergalactic battle. And it's got a lot of little models off the Odyssey, but it goes off in completely different directions. So there is a world in which, for example, remember Polyphemus and the sheep? There's a world in which Captain Roadstrom and his crew land, and they see a bunch of sheep-like creatures, but the sheep-like creatures are going to the bars and having beer, and eventually they realize they're actually human beings who look like sheep and are treated like sheep. And eventually the Polyphemus-like creatures start taking the captain and eating everybody. People are constantly dying and coming back to life in this book. There again, each chapter goes off in another wild direction. It's got a great focus. It's got a great structure to it. It really works as a complete novel, and some of his best writing, I think, in this book. So it's a good place to start. And if you find a beat up old copy, you can take it into the bathtub. There's a lot of collections of Lafferty. They're not easy to find. This new series, as I said, you don't want to take into the bathtub because they cost a fortune. I bought them a little early when they came out, and they're like 40 or 50 bucks when they come out. But once you've missed the boat, there was only 300 or 400 copies each edition. They cost like hundreds of bucks. So this one's listed for $300 or $400. It's not even a first edition. So you're better off probably finding some of the old beat up paperbacks. But I really highly recommend getting to know Lafferty. We'll talk more about him. He really requires focus. He really requires attention, a certain sense of humor at the time. I've definitely been in passages of my life when I tried to read Lafferty and found him just couldn't get into him. It just seemed wrong for the time. But if you feel like a little tension, you're relaxed a bit, you want to have some fun with a real intelligence, and an intelligence like no one you've ever read before, because he is a really peculiarly American, self-taught genius of completely whimsical ideas. Some of which, again, from his reading is quite extraordinary. He was obviously a very intensively interested man. And he joins together completely crazy ideas. So there's one of the famous stories is Thus We Frustrate Charlemagne, in which a robot and a bunch of people are going back into the past and changing history with the Muslim and the Catholic, with the meetings of the Christians and the Muslims at a certain period in history. And they're trying to go off and alter history. And as they alter history, of course, they don't know it's altering because they're part of the history that's being altered. His focus is also strange. There's a great story in here called Six Fingers of Time, one of his best and most coherent stories for new readers, where everyone who has sixth finger can speed up time. And he's very close to that character's point of view. But most of the time, he has a very broad sense of point of view. So it's very much like with Space Shanty, you're sort of watching a sort of stage epic narrative. So his stuff is very framed like epic narrative, where you're here seeing all the different characters in the scenes. And there's often many characters, even in his shortest stories. So you have to focus on that. And so it does take a little shift of your expectations when you read his stories. But it's really worth practicing, learning how to read him. And again, I was thinking all through it, I kept thinking, this is a great, they keep talking about how you should learn a new language in order to avoid Alzheimer's or learn how to play a musical instrument. Read short stories by him because it really makes you think in different ways when you hear a story. And he's just brilliant. So he wrote hundreds. I guess I don't know how many stories are going to come out, how many volumes are coming out with the Centipede edition. There was large high points and low points in his life, I guess. But when I've been reading through these stories, it doesn't matter what year they came out. They're all pretty consistently good and unpredictable. Okay, so R.A. Lafferty. I think next week since we've talked about the American Flann O'Brien, I think next week we have to do the Irish Flann O'Brien, who is, of course, Flann O'Brien. We'll talk to you next week in the bathtub. Bye.